I think that's one of the most interesting things. I think, like John Lennon, for example, with Tomorrow Never Knows, I think he's starting with the concept that they're introduced to mainly by indie classical music, which is what if a song only had one chord? Like the idea of droning, like there aren't typical chord changes.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Grooves of Influence. My name's Xavier, your host, and this is the music podcast where we sit down with your favorite artists to talk to them about their most influential album. This week, I'm super excited to be joined by guest artist Koan from Penelope Road. How's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's exciting to have you here. And if you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, my name's Koan. I am the lead guitarist for Penelope Road. I've been in the band for about like 2-ish and a bit years, but we've been things have been picking up a lot recently, and so we just kind of finished our first full country tour. We're sitting down to write our whole debut album. I just got back from Florida yesterday, because we basically wrote our whole album over the course of a week.
Wow.
And yeah, we've recently also just released a Chance Encounter EP, which was just kind of like our last group of like what I would consider like the old batch of songs. So it feels like a real big like turning point in the band's trajectory right now.
That's super cool, super exciting. So how would you describe your old sound versus maybe that sound that you have coming up, if you can?
Yeah. I think what's been interesting with Penelope Road is like we've never been able to name our genre, like even ourselves. Like people have, like our fans have an issue doing it too, but like we don't know necessarily what we are. We just want to make cool songs that sound like all the songs we like. And so I think a lot of the old songs started as just like half of them were just kind of pop songs that we wanted to kind of make interesting musically. So we'd add like jazz changes and key changes in them and stuff like that. And a lot of it was kind of like old soul feelings. Like we, drew from like Motown and Stax a lot, I think, in our kind of part writing. But now I think we're starting to fall into a rhythm that feels like more like just a genuine voice. I wouldn't really call it like that much more indie rocky, but it feels a little more indie to me. It's a little harder. I think we just went in with this album and wanted to write songs that everybody will sing back at us, and that's kind of what it is as a genre, instead of, all the kind of musical categories that you can put on it.
Very cool. And speaking of, all these influences and pulling from all these different eras, if I were to ask you, the question, what is the most influential album to you? If you had to pick one, what would it be?
If I had to pick one, it would be Revolver by the Beatles. That's an almost impossible question, and I have 10 other ones off the top of my head I could name. But I grew up listening to the Beatles. I probably listened to their whole catalog. My parents played it before I could speak or walk. I grew up imagining I was part of the Beatles. Like when I'd step off a plane as a 5-year-old, I'd be like, oh, this is when they landed in the US. And I'm a huge nerd when it comes to them as well. So I think Revolver specifically marks a kind of turning point in their career as well, where they start to get a lot more kind of experimental. And that's something I'm very into. I have a degree in music composition from Emory. So studying experimental classical composition and knowing that the biggest pop band in the world at the time was drawing on that stuff for that record is really interesting and cool to me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's aligning almost in your own journey. It kind of feels like right now, you're kind of taking a step in a new direction as a band.
Yeah.
And this album you chose in that moment, I guess, how does it feel?
The record itself,
or just you as a person, exploring new sounds,
It's so interesting. It's really engaging. I've never had, I guess, the luxury to just kind of create songs before. I was either, in school, or I was working while I was in school as well, and music was always the side passion. So to be able to do this as a full-time career now is really interesting because I get to sit down and just be 100% creative. And I think that allows for like a kind of experimentation and just a different approach and attitude to songwriting. Kind of like it's less that I need to speak every ounce of my soul out into every single song, and now songs can just kind of be like explorations of a single moment in time or a feeling or things like that, just an idea in your head.
Yeah, very cool. Going back to the Beatles album, was there particular tracks that have stood out to you, stood the test of time?
Yeah, I mean the obvious one is Tomorrow Never Knows. I It might be their best song, I think, in my opinion. I that definitely speaks to the kind of experimental thing I was talking about earlier. But the beauty of this album is that there's just incredible, like Tomorrow Never Knows I would put in the category of an amazing song because of its production and because of the kind of like new approach to songwriting that was pushing in popular music. But I think what makes this album so good is that you also have tracks like Here, There, and Everywhere and For No One, which are just like beautiful songs that aren't too complicated production wise and aren't really necessarily pushing an envelope sonically in the way that Tomorrow Never Knows was, but they're just such gorgeous, beautiful songs. That's what the Beatles are so good at doing, that balance.
Yeah, just having a diverse, range of what they do, just kind of like you guys too. It's pretty funny, as you're kind of talking, like the similarities I'm catching right now.
I
You
would
know,
I wouldn't compare
I mean,
myself to the Beatles, yeah.
Hey, dude, no, I'm not saying
But if
that
you're
per se.
saying it,
But in the stylistically, you guys are different. But it's almost a mindset of an artist
yeah,
and how you guys are exploring. I think is
yeah,
kind of similar, which is really
we're
cool.
we're definitely hungry. Like I think we the five of us all push each other to really chase something new and special, and it's very very easy to feel incredibly inspired when the five of us get together to write. So yeah, and I think you can hear when an album has hunger behind it. Like all of the great albums of all time, you can hear that a band is really trying to do something new.
How did you guys meet? What was kind of that experience?
Yeah, so I knew Max, who's the lead vocalist and other guitar player, and James, the bassist, from high school. Honestly, I knew Max back in middle school, and we in high school had this like rock band program where we got sorted into bands and played with each other, and that's kind of how I got to know them. Max met Charles, the other lead singer and the keys player, in All State Chorus, and then we knew Anthony. I knew Anthony and a few others of us knew him. He lived outside of the city, in Atlanta, but he came in for a lot of like studio work at a studio that I used to track some stuff at as just like a session guitarist. So we eventually just got like the right iteration of people, got together. We had a residency at this like Buckhead nightclub in Atlanta that was like a little, it's just, if you're in Atlanta, you know what that area is. It was a lot of like strange kind of like covers we'd have to do. We're just like dipping into like Luther Vandross and like Marvin Gaye and great songs, amazing music, very funny for us to be covering all the time. But that's kind of how we got our footing as a band.
When you're talking about experimenting, and you like the Beatles experimentation, what aspects kind of stood out to you there?
Um, yeah, so let me see. There are a lot of elements to this,
Yeah.
especially with Revolver specifically. I would say Revolver and Rubber Soul are kind of partner albums. They were written around the same time and they mark a kind of transition from like folk to acid rock, I would say. And that period of the Beatles is when they started getting into like world musics, like Indian classical music, which is something that I grew up listening to. My dad is a great sitar player, and my mother was trained in Indian classical vocals for like 17 years, and they're very musical. And so when I hear the kind of Indian music influences that are all across Revolver, I think that's one of the most interesting things. I think like John Lennon, for example, with Tomorrow Never Knows, I think he's starting with the concept that they're introduced to mainly by Indian classical music, which is what if a song only had one chord? Like the idea of droning. Like there aren't typical chord changes like a folk song has. Instead, we stay on a single chord the entire time, and what's happening is just kind of like a textural exploration over that drone. I think that's really cool to hear it kind of be done in popular music. And then I also think like they're listening to at the time what was happening in like the European contemporary space, like Schoenberg and these experimental serialist composers who are drawing on modern technologies of the time to create new sounds. So that's why in Tomorrow Never Knows, like I I think Paul McCartney had like a handheld tape recorder that he went around the building and area just recording sounds like of him laughing, of some kind of like random building noises as well, and those become the sample loops that make it into the song. And so there's an entire my I double majored at Emory and my other degree was in philosophy, and so I'm really interested in like kind of the philosophical movements behind a lot of musical moments. So I think like Schoenberg and these kind of like atmospheric ambient composers as well. Not that Schoenberg was one of them, but like there's a kind of philosophical orientation towards like thinking about yourself in a space, thinking about space as musical material, thinking about technology as a kind of um always operative thing that allows music to happen. And so instead of sorting instruments in one category and maybe recording devices in another, that line gets blurred with these kinds of songs. That's what's really interesting to me.
No, that's incredible. I've never heard anybody express that or talk about that. So that's super cool, dude. And definitely like with your background, like, I mean, that's something that I think most people probably wouldn't catch as much or pull from, to see that influence. Is there any other parts of the album that you think like only people who listen to Indian music would notice?
Um, that's interesting. Off this, I mean, Love You Too, George Harrison's song. He was obviously, I
Yes.
think, the most influenced by Indian music directly. I think that's just kind of like on the nose. But I think a lot. I would go as far as to say that like the entire psychedelic rock movement in history wouldn't have happened without the influence of Indian music. So I think tracks like I'm Only Sleeping and She Said are a little less direct than Tomorrow Never Knows and Love You Too, but where there's like literally like a droning sitar and tampura in those songs. But I think the idea of having something very washy, like I think the flanger effect and these kind of chorus effects that we're hearing on this album were attempts to emulate the sound of like many strings on Indian instruments that kind of are sympathetic strings, so they ring out and you never hit them directly, but they when a certain note is played on a playing string, those strings ring out, and that creates that kind of like flange effect. So I think a lot of the tones here are kind of like latently inspired by um Indian classical instruments and sounds. Yeah.
That's cool. I mean, being from a family of music, I mean, with your dad and mom both being musicians,
Yeah.
what was that experience like growing up?
I mean, it was really fun. My first band was a family band when I was like 2 years old. My dad had this old 4-track tape recorder, and he was like, "Okay, we're gonna do a bunch of songs." And so we would like, 2-year-old me would like write a song and record it, or we'd cover. A lot of times we'd cover Beatles songs. And so yeah, I don't know. Music was just always. There's never a moment in my house where music isn't playing, whether it's someone playing it or it's like a CD in. It was yeah, it's very formative, and I think my parents have great music taste and lots of musical knowledge as well, and that's been passed on to me. And then being able to go and study it as well, and study jazz and learn all these kinds of like moments historically behind music, um, really influences how I approach not just creating my own music, but even when I listen to a song I already have, like I find that I very quickly judge songs, not in like a positive, like a good song or bad song way, but I like to very quickly kind of know where I am in the like grand web and network of genres and ideas, you know.
I guess, with your love for philosophy and thinking about music in depthly, how does that transfer to the music you create?
Yeah, that's the question I'm trying to answer still, I think. Like, it's some great poets are able to kind of directly speak philosophically in their music, I would say. Like the greatest lyricists ever in my books, that's Leonard Cohen and Paul Simon and Mike Stipe. They're able to just kind of they're such great poets that they're able to immediately turn what is a philosophical idea into like a beautiful kind of very down to earth lyric, in a not pretentious way. And that's a really hard balance to strike lyrically. And I'd like to think at times I've been there, and then most times I'm not. It's definitely a tool you have to train. But I think kind of compositionally for songs, I did a lot of like soundtrack stuff. I did a lot of experimental kind of improvisational composition stuff when I was in college, and those tools are definitely still there when I'm writing music for Penelope Road. It's an audio engineering thing as well, like trying experimental recording techniques, wanting to make sure you always hear the room that a guitar is recorded in on top, or that drums are recorded in, just on top of the drums themselves. Like this idea of contextualization and how you can use technology to create a space is something that I'm always thinking about as well. But yeah, I don't know. With the thing about being in a band is that you can be writing the same song and you can have an idea of what it's about philosophically or emotionally, and someone else will have their own completely different mental association with it. But I think that makes it interesting. I think that's what is kind of the blessing of being in a band, that you can mean so many things at once.
100%. That's music, right? Everyone's got
Yeah,
their own meaning behind it. Same with poetry. And you
right.
talked about some great, artists. And I think of Leonard Cohen and like some of his songs, I think it means something. Then I look up, the meaning is people have completely different opinions, it's kind
Right,
of funny.
right.
So it's super cool in
Yeah.
that aspect. When it comes to composition wise, you know, you said you did some stuff with soundtracks. What was that?
Yeah, well, my sister's actually a filmmaker. It's a big arts family, so she does a lot of animated films, but also live action films, and she always gets me to do soundtrack stuff. There were also just other students at my university where I would do soundtracks for their student films. And that to me is really fun. I had the chance to like write a score for a great string quartet as well, that had a residency at Emory. And I love being able to do that kind of classical contemporary stuff, because there's such a wealth of kind of canon that everybody knows already in the classical space, and there's also just kind of a certain skill threshold that most classical players meet, whereas your average, garage band might not have that. So I can really ask musicians to push themselves, and I can kind of push instruments in ways that maybe they're not traditionally used, but that's what's really interested to me. There's this whole kind of like thing called extended techniques. So that would be, like knocking on a violin instead of bowing the strings, or messing with tunings, or producing odd kind of like shrill harmonics, all those kinds of like experimental techniques, which then I love to apply to my guitar playing, because the electric guitar is such a versatile instrument tonally. And there are a lot of cool ways to make it not do the thing it's supposed to do. And that's really interesting to me.
Yeah. All right. We're gonna make all the guitar players happy. What's your pedal board look like?
Oh, it's massive. It's a surfboard. On the road, I've kind of tailored it to something that works very, very well for live performance. I have some of my weirder pedals just kind of laid out on my desk, like a pitch shifter, this Brainwaves. It's like a cheaper version of the Digitech Whammy. But I usually this is very fun one. This micro synth pedal here as well, which I used on some of our stuff recently, which turns your guitar basically into like an analog synth. But I run like a bunch of different gain pedals for different overdrives. I have a Wampus, no, not a Wampus, the Tumnus, Wampler Tumnus, which is like a Klon style overdrive. Then I have a Ibanez mini tube screamer. I also have this like boutique Cornerstone. It's called the Gladio. It's like supposed to be, there's this guy who used to build all these special amps called Dumbles, and it's an emulator of those. I have like your generic Boss chorus and a cool spacious reverb pedal. But with Penelope Road, it's mainly just about like getting those vintage sounds right, and throwing my own flair on it. So I'll have like an auto wah, these kind of cooler new mod pedals, but it's really the core of my tone is just trying to get something to sound as like raw and rich as possible.
How do you do that?
It's like a constant search. I'm so far down the rabbit hole. I could get so nerdy about this stuff, but I have a lot of like always on pedals. So I have a compressor that's like a studio compressor basically that I run on my board at all times, just kind of like lightly making sure I'm not pushing the amp too hard. I have a preamp pedal, the EP booster, that's just always on low. And like to me, it's like, because I'm also trained in like audio engineering a little, like I can hear an EQ of a guitar easily, and so I can tell exactly like it's adding some mid-range fullness and richness. It's pushing my amp a little more in like a nice way that doesn't compress it too much. But yeah, it's been years. I think I've poured every single dollar I've ever gotten from birthdays or Christmas or anything into my guitar rig.
And that would make every guitar player smile. So, we all
Yes.
relate to it, dude.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. It's interesting. I kind of pulling back on something you said earlier. It was when we were talking a little bit more about the philosophy aspect. It's almost like you saw with this Beatles album, like the ability to use technology to tell the story that they were trying to do, through different
Right.
recording techniques, specifically like recording techniques. Is there a time like with you guys with Penelope Road that you've seen like, maybe you've used the technique to try to tell a story? I know you've talked about the vintage side and kind of like that old soul type of feel, but maybe something more, emotionally. Have you ever tried to do something there?
That's a good question. I think I would actually say up to this point, like with the new songs we've written, there's a song that I wrote a while ago and we brought to the band and we've been playing it live since about June-ish, called Smile Again. And I think that's where it's really going to, like, from that song on, it's really going to start playing a factor in it.
Very cool.
Because we're now all going for tones that feel just new. A lot of the stuff like on our old tracks like Mercy and all that, like I didn't want to bring out a weird out of the world guitar tone in what is a very much just like a old kind of southern rock feel. But with these new tracks, I'm really ready to explore. I did some guitar work on a much harder kind of like shoegazy album back while I was in Penelope Road as well. The singer, her band is, we went to high school with her as well. The band name is Whisper Doll, and that's a lot of more where I would do stuff like that. It was very shoegazy. Anthony and James as well played on it, so it was like half of Penelope Road doing that debut album with her. And that's where like my favorite kind of technique I used is we found this like old amp in the studio we were using that was like something like 80 watts, 100 watts, like this super loud, ridiculous amp head, put it into like 10 different speakers, mic'd different speakers with different mics, threw mics around the room, and we cranked the amp to the absolute loudest it can get, and it sounded like it was breaking. Like the power was cutting in and out, and it was almost about to just like blow out completely, and there's something about that tone that I'm so happy with. Because it sounds like something screaming at you. Like it sounds guttural, it sounds visceral. There's something vocal about it, about the way it breaks, and I really like that.
That's cool. Yeah, no, that's
Yeah,
sick, dude. And I know I seen your Radiohead shirt today.
but
So
yeah,
I
yeah,
do want to give you a chance, to talk about maybe some of those other albums that I know played a role in making you who
yeah.
you are as an artist.
I was gonna say, yeah, Kid A would be up there as well. And In Rainbows, honestly, they have so many good albums. But Kid A for me, I would say maybe there's a theme here. Like it also marks a turning point in their career where they go more experimental. Like they came out of OK Computer as like the rock band that was going to move rock forward, and Kid A is a left turn in that sense because it's so experimental and it's so strange and atmospheric. But I think their most beautiful tracks are on that album, like How to Disappear Completely and Motion Picture Soundtrack are gorgeous. I'd also throw Heroes by David Bowie up there. Anything that Brian Eno has produced, especially around that time, he's the king of like philosophy and music. He like they wrote that album with um like a card deck called Oblique Strategies, I believe. And each card just had like a different sentence on it. Some of them were kind of more musical, like try writing a song with one chord. Some of them were way more kind of like esoteric and abstract. And each person in the room would draw a card and try to achieve their card in that song, but they wouldn't know what everyone else's card was. And so it's like a very kind of constructed but also very like focused methodologically on how to create in new ways, which I think is awesome, and the album turns out so well. Those are probably the other top ones I'd name. I'd also have to shout out Arcade Fire. I think The Suburbs is like their best batch of songs themselves, but their first album, their debut album, is so compositionally interesting. It's like lo-fi. You can hear that there's like 10 or 15 people playing on the track at the same time, and yet every song just like feels like a gut punch in the best way.
Yeah.
Yes.
You talking about the pulling the cards made me think of
Yeah.
something, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on it. Like, how do you balance like that organization and creativity?
Mm,
Definitely in a moment where, now you're full-time musician. It's a different world, you don't have school and all that going on.
yeah. Um I That's a great question. I think in the everyday sense, like the logical answer is like when I was doing school, I graduated now, but like when you're doing the kind of like business side of being in a band or the like logistical side of van life and stuff like that, it feels so different from the creative aspect. It's like this is another world that I just need to like do the busy work of so that I can do the freedom thing, you know? It's
Hmm.
very black and white. But when it comes to writing, I think what's really interesting is that like organization is a form of creativity. How you organize and how you choose to leave something messy or leave something completely figured out when it comes to like an idea, or how you organize in the sense of how you plan to arrange a song, how you approach writing a song, like those are all creative decisions as well. um that's why like I think the art of songwriting is a question of organization, but it's always a creative decision, you know.
Cool. And if there was, I mean, we've talked a lot about the Beatles, the Revolver album, and we kind of shared a few more. If there was any like one last thing you think the audience should know about any of the albums, uh, what would it be?
Ooh. um I th- hmm I guess what I love about all those albums I named, especially Revolver, which I kind of touched on at the beginning, but it's going purely experimental for the sake of doing something out there is cool, but it won't deliver greatness, in my opinion. I think what makes that album so special is that the Beatles still wanted every song to be a great listenable song, and being able to find the balance between going out there and really experimenting and stepping outside of a comfort zone, and then also creating something that is at the end of the day something that you want to listen to over and over again. Like that balance is incredible, and it's the hardest thing to achieve, but it's the most important aspect of writing a good song.
Yeah, I love that. And all the fans of Penelope Road, like me, if where can we listen to your music? How can we connect with you? What do you
Yeah,
recommend?
you can find us pretty much everywhere. We're on Spotify, Apple Music, all that. We have a lot of kind of like long form YouTube stuff coming. We also have a cover coming up on Spotify soon, and we'll have singles throughout the kind of new year. Um, we're planning on getting vinyl soon, but that'll probably just be sold at our live shows. So we're also going back out on tour. I personally think we're a better band live than we are recorded, and that's not to knock our recordings at all. I love how we sound live. And so I think everybody should come catch a show in the big 2026. If there are people in Atlanta, we're running 3 shows as hometown shows in December as well. One of them sold out already, but we're still selling tickets for the Terminal West show and the Variety Playhouse show. That's the 19th and the 20th of December. Yeah, those are going to be great.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm super excited to see what's coming next for you guys, and I'm looking forward to hearing those new tones.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.